Welcome to Synced on Air. I'm your host, Angelique Robb, and today I'm really excited to meet Claire Chambers, who I put out a press release recently about her new products and got so much attention on LinkedIn. So Claire, very excited to have you from Meadowlab. Excited to have you on Sync Live.
Thank you so
Oh
much.
my goodness. Maybe I should start over. I did two things wrong, and okay, we'll just
But it made me more relaxed as we get started.
I'll start over. So
Okay.
welcome to Synced on Air. I'm your host, Angelique Robb, and I'm really excited to have Claire Chambers here from Meadowlab today. Recently, I posted about her press release, her new products that she's launched, and got a great, a resounding, amount of comments and questions and lots of intrigue on LinkedIn. So Claire, very excited to have you tell us more about Meadowlab today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Angelique. I'm so excited to be here and also to have discovered this little pocket of community you're creating for professionals in the space.
Thank you. Everybody's thrilled to find out, what started Meadowlab. And when I look at your background, I go, my goodness, you've done lots of different things. How did the idea, you've not only launched Meadowlab, but also Flowerlands as well. So talk us through, how this all came about, please.
Sure. Well, like we were chatting about before the show, I'm somebody who's new to the industry, coming in sort of with an outside in perspective. My story is, I try to make it short, but I spent about 20 years in e-commerce. In 2022, I sort of reached a point in my life where I was thinking, wow, I've done this for the last 20 years. What do I want the next 20 years to be like? And I really had this epiphany that maybe doing the same thing I had been doing was not it. And so I sort of went through a moment of, searching for what my next thing was. And I had a little bit of an epiphany while I was sort of winding down my last role, which was that what I was really passionate about were experiences. And, this idea and what I'd spent a lot of my career doing, whether it was in retail sort of e-commerce business I had started, or later in businesses that I had been running, was sort of stitching together an experience that was really remarkable. So, in a physical retail store, you walk in and you smell a certain smell and the customer service is just right and the product assortment. And what gets me going is sort of that linked experience where you just go, wow, that's great. And as somebody, I grew up on the West Coast. Nature was a huge part of my life. My parents are avid hikers. We used to go on family vacations backpacking versus anything else. So, nature being this sort of vector in my life. And I sort of had this inkling that maybe I should be looking at landscape as an experience. So I was myself inspired by these, when you walk into a garden and you sort of have this visceral experience of seeing the light come through the trees and you're sort of transported to a place that goes beyond a garden for a second. And so I was sort of taken with that thread, but I had no idea what that meant yet. And so I enrolled in classes at the New York Botanical Garden. And I started, as a sort of type A person in between jobs, I just threw myself into that. And I was that sort of dorky student sitting in the front row, like raising my hand right second, and taking it way too seriously. My husband was like, babe, just stop. This is just, like, you've got to calm down. And I was like, no, I need to get my homework done. So I really threw myself into it. And as happens to people who are entrepreneurial, I feel like this idea found me, in a sense. And when I say that, what really kind of came together was this idea that, so many people in my program, which was the School of Professional Horticulture Landscape Design program, so many students that I went to school with and professionals who were already working in the field, but were also taking classes, were trying to get these biodiverse, beautiful meadows and landscapes into the world. But there was so much trepidation about it because everybody who had had actually installed landscapes had a horror story to tell about a meadow. And, and it's so plain to see when you look around the US that what's easiest for people to put in are a few shrubs, a few plants, a lot of mulch. And it's, it's clear that that's not what our world needs right now. And so I was taken by this dichotomy, by the idea that there was a gap, and, and it was hard for people to do what they wanted to do. And so I started, I was simultaneously working on a meadow in my own yard, which was very difficult, and had, maybe everyone who listens to this who's done a meadow will be like, oh my God, but it was like on a hillside, and the mugwort and the seeds were washing down the hill. So anyway, look, I came across a product in the UK, and it was they were calling it this Wildflower Turf. I searched some more, and it looked like a product that was readily available. And so, of course, I searched here, and when I couldn't find it, on the, online here, I reached out to the company and I said, do you have any US suppliers? And they said, no, not yet. And so that's really where the idea was born. And I ended up, after sort of hearing that and doing more of a search in the US, I really realized that this is a space that nobody has really innovated in yet. And these Wildflower Turf in the UK is a company that has spent 20 years doing this and really had a very rigorous sort of science-backed approach that I really liked. And so I reached out to them, and we began a conversation, and here we are a few years later.
That is awesome. Wildflower Turf launched before I left the UK, so I had heard of it, but I had never used the product, but yeah, knew that it had launched there. So
Yeah.
That's great that you've, been able to benefit from the research that they did leading up to this. How is it different? Because we are a different climate. The US is a lot bigger than the UK. Yeah. What have you evolved since then?
Yeah, great questions. And that was really the fundamental question was, okay, this works in the UK, but what might be different here in the US? And obviously, one of the first things that comes to mind is just regionality. They pretty much have a climate. I mean, probably many microclimates, of course, in the UK, but it's, you can have a seed mix and it sort of broadly works for the country of England. And that of course is not true. And also the plants that grow in England, what forms a meadow in the UK is very different than what forms a meadow in the US. And so really the first question, I had was, will this work with US species? And so almost as soon as I got the idea that I wanted to do this and sort of began conversations with the Wildflower Turf folks about possibly partnering together on it, I was beginning trials over here. So we've done over, sort of 2.25 years of trials now. The first thing was really just taking this commercial growing process that has worked well in the UK and then reverse engineering that to see how it did with US species, and specifically warm season grasses, which don't grow in the same way as cool season grasses. Also, we have many species that have, tap roots and, not to say they don't have over there, but we have plants that really thrive on these deep roots. And so this is a very, it's a small amount of substrate, and it's sort of, a different way of germinating. And so I did that for the last few years, kind of dialing in incrementally on what was working. So we started with an off-the-shelf seed mix. Then the next year we worked with one of the amazing staff members, Mark at Earned Seed, and he helped really dial in on that. And then the latest iteration in sort of the species mix has been working with Larry Weiner, who's, one of the top meadow people in the US, to think about how do we really make this an optimal mix, not only for sort of early germination, but for what happens in year 5, year 6. How do we make sure that it continues and it stays legible and beautiful and kind of, contained in its own way. And so I've really enjoyed working with the team at LWLA to do that in this last iteration, which is what we're going to market with. So it's been a long journey, but the the R&D was very successful. My backyard is now full of sod. So that's, that was my first case study, and really, fun to see that and really test it, right? And see what works and make sure that I feel good about it. So that's been fun. But we started to put sod in last year also on various tests with clients and things like that. So we're getting going, and now we're ready to hit the ground with this year's commercial production.
Fantastic. For those people that haven't installed Meadows, do you want to go in a bit more detail of the issues that you had? I know we talked ahead of this, and I have some, an experience too that I could add to, but I'd love to hear your frustrations and how you've dealt with.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can't wait to hear your story. I mean, it's one of these things. I actually really love hearing people's stories about this because it's so validating, of course. But yeah, I started as as somebody who was sort of armed with internet knowledge, which can be kind of a dangerous place to start. But I want to say, I think one of the challenges in meadow making generally is that we as consumers are sort of marketed really well with beautiful pictures of meadows, and yet they're maybe not what actually is a northeastern typical meadow. And so a lot of the photos you see for seed mixes on some commercial sites are very bold, very bright, very colorful. And actually, when you look at a northeastern meadow, you're really seeing something a little bit muted and sort of more subtle in a sense. Yeah, naturalistic. And so I think that's one challenge. But I myself, the biggest challenge I found from the get-go was, of course, site prep. So I think most people go into a meadow thinking, okay, well, I have the seed and I have the site. And if I put the two of these together, then these seeds will grow.
Yeah.
And maybe they go one step further and they actually prepare the land in some way by maybe raking it or digging it or tilling it, which it turns out is totally the wrong way to go about it, right? Like what you're doing essentially then is saying, dormant weed seed bank, please germinate.
Germinate, yeah.
Please germinate. And by the way, here's some wildflower seed as well. And wildflowers are actually pretty poor competitors compared to those weeds, particularly many of the invasive ones we have on the, everywhere, but here on the East Coast as well. And so what you get really is an experience growing weeds. And I think that
never ending weed pulling. Yeah.
Never ending weed pulling. And to compound it, it's very hard to know when you start to germinate wildflowers versus weeds, it can be hard to know what's what to the average person. Even today at my trial sites, after 2 years, it can take a few weeks to really identify a seedling. And I know there's some people who are true experts in this space. I myself, I'm not one yet, but it can take a long time. And so to expect a homeowner or a contractor to be able to go out there and identify that is a tall order.
Well, and I guess my experience was, a paying customer that we were putting a meadow in, and all they were seeing is weeds out of control and, having to hire us to hand weed them out or to, remove that. So pretty labor intensive, because you're right. The weed seeds, how do you fight those? It sounds like Yeah. Let's see.
Well, I think that's a whole other podcast. But what I will say is that, what we say to our contractor partners who are installing this is, number one, site preparation is absolutely key. So you can put a piece of beautiful sod on any sort of landscape, weed seed beneath that hasn't been expressed yet. It will eventually find a way through. It might not happen with sod. It might not happen straight away. It might take several years because, it's covered and there's no light and that sort of thing. But eventually it'll find a way. And so the most important thing people can do, obviously, is just prep their sites well. And that, it can happen in lots of ways. Solarizing is a great method here that I found, although you really have to leave the solarization there longer. So there's a lot of things you can do to prepare the ground in different methods. And it gets into debates about chemicals and not. And so I won't go into that. But the first and most important thing is to prepare the site, right? And when we're growing sod, one of the benefits of sod really is that we're really kind of growing it in an outdoor greenhouse in a sense. Like we're really paying attention to germination to make sure that the germination occurs before, for a lot of species, not for all of them, but for a lot of species, you have the germination happening already. And so when you do put it down on the ground, you're not you're not having that same competition with weeds seed. You're covering it, and so it is suppressing what is there. And hopefully you've done your site prep, so there's not much there. And then those plants, when they hit the ground, they really just
Take off.
grow. They take off. They literally take off. It's astounding to see.
Well, because normally, it's 3 to 5 years to get a meadow established. So when you get the turf, it's equivalent to a couple years in, or is that hard to say? I don't, yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say it's definitely equivalent to the second year. So I think you're really
Yeah.
skipping, what I would say is you're kind of skipping this first
Establishment.
painful year. Yeah. And when you are growing from seed, one of the things that we sell seed as well, and we recommend is that you mow the area every 4 to 6 weeks. So another challenge, and that's to keep these annual weeds down and make sure that the seed, the wildflower seeds have a chance to establish themselves. But what that means for a homeowner, which is really hard, and I know you're on the other side of this with your project, is you're saying, okay, so yeah, we planted this meadow for you, and now you need to mow it 4 to 6 weeks.
What?
For a whole year, and you're not going to see any wildflowers whatsoever, and that's a really tall order. So the shortcut that, because the seedlings have germinated for us, in our growing process, which is about 12 weeks, when we transplant the sod and we give it to somebody, then you have, a carpet essentially of little seedlings that really respond well to hitting the ground, as I said, and they grow, and you don't have to worry about the weed competition. And so you don't have to mow in year one. So you do have first year blooms, and you do have that kind of immediate instant gratification, which those are words that should never go with meadow, but they're more likely to go with meadow if you are using seed, or maybe if you're using lots of plugs or something like that. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And do you need to, and again, I'm talking from, Scottish meadow. So we had to collect all the cuttings that you would cut each year and remove them. Is that the same process for your turf as well?
That's right. So maintenance, meadow maintenance is low maintenance, but is not no maintenance, and I think that's so important for people to understand. So our regime that we recommend is 1 to 2 cuttings a year with collection, which in itself can be hard, because that's what that either means, maybe weed whacking and raking, or if you have a collecting mower, that can work. And if it's a big site, you might need a flail mower that has a collector. It's an endeavor, but yeah, once it's established, it really shouldn't need water. And these maintenance mowings really make sure that your meadow doesn't turn into a forest, which is what eastern meadows want to do, is to turn into a forest.
And do you have, or will you have, so do you have a product that is for a certain area just now, or tell us about the range of your Meadowlab?
Yeah, I've been getting such great inbound on the site in the last few weeks, probably thanks to you and other people who have posted the press release. But I'm hearing from people in Colorado and Oregon and Chicago, and I'm dying to help people. Right now, it's really important that a meadow, work within its regional context. So right now we're kind of servicing the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So our growing site is in New Jersey, central New Jersey, and we can deliver, sod is a perishable item. So we want to be able to get the sod not only to where it belongs in the world, but also within the time frame that's appropriate. When we start harvesting, we'll harvest early in the morning, and we have about a 300-mile radius, which gets it there in that day. And then, we ask people to install, the next day at the latest. And so we are, but we are building a pipeline for more growing sites. And as we do that, what we'll do is we'll take this mix that has a pretty flexible backbone of plants, and grasses specifically, and we'll just tailor it for each growing region. And we probably won't get down into ecotypes, but we will definitely be having a mix that is appropriate for the hardiness and the plants that come from that region. And of course, those are the plants that do best, right? Yes, you're going to have the best success with those. So we look forward to that expansion.
Great. And so Meadowlab can supply your projects today. Is that right? Or
Well, yes and no.
okay, okay.
We do, so we have seed. We are supplying people with seed, and we're supplying people with our other product called Wildflower Soil, which is essentially a pre-mixed growing medium with our wildflower mixes in it.
Right.
And it's a great solution where you might need to import topsoil, or you have a very finite kind of lawn to meadow situation. So that's a great product, and I'm really excited about it. We haven't given it as much love as wildflower sod, just because we know what wildflower sod is such a game changer. But it's a great product. So that's available to order and deliver now, starting in May. And we are taking pre-orders for the sod, which will come online in August. So it's about, as I said, it's about a 12-week growing process. Starting this fall, we'll have 2 seed mixes available to order in that. And, we're doing tests on a shade tolerant seed mix and some others. So we're looking forward to
Well,
kind of adding to
August
the
is
portfolio.
not that far away. So I think
It's
that's
not.
pretty immediate. If you're planning a project just now, the
That's right.
chances are
That's
it
right.
won't go in the ground until August anyway.
That's right. And of course, people are planning projects in 2027 already. So, there's definitely, it's a long lead thing, and especially for bigger meadows.
Yes, yes. I guess the one thing that I think of that is a challenge that we haven't touched on. I mean, you've touched on the prep. What about the rich soils versus poor soils? Like if your soil is actually too rich, I mean, that's one concern that I'm sure you've thought about as well.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? Because I think we're new in the US about talking about wildflowers compared to what I was used to in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think that was
Certainly.
something that really raised alarm bells, is that you're always wanting rich soil, and now we want the opposite. But that's a good thing, right?
It's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing. And so often you get the question, well, should we amend the soil, before we put in wildflowers? And the answer is usually no, don't touch the soil. But wildflowers are so adaptable, and there are instances where somebody has a super clay, deep clay soil, and that can be a problem. Or there are cases where the soil is sort of so rocky and sandy that some things may not thrive. But for the most part, what we're choosing in our mixes are real generalist species. So we're looking for those species that can tolerate a very broad variety of soil conditions. They prefer soil conditions that are not so rich, and that's good, because most people, unless you're converting a garden into a wildflower area, generally you don't have sort of the richest, loamiest soil, and that's good. So generally we say, have a good sense of what your soil is, but for the most part, unless there's some, extenuating circumstance, you shouldn't need to do anything. What you might see is that you might see clay loving plants, from our mix. And we have about 40 or so types of species in our seed mix. So, we've really designed it to have the range that you need to have success.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. And do you see that your turf will be great for green roofs, stormwater infrastructure? I mean, give us the examples of your test sites maybe, and the range of where you see it being applicable.
Yeah. So the 2 seed mixes that we're developing now are both for sort of mesic, upland meadows, dry, but not super dry. We used to get rainfall in the Northeast. It's been a little hit or miss the last few years, but that's sort of where we're starting, because that's the most broadly applicable to a meadow. But on our pipeline, in our pipeline, we have a shade tolerant seed mix that we've worked on with Larry Weiner again. So really drawing on their expertise and choosing plant mix. Again, usually when you need some sun to have a meadow, generally speaking. And so this has basically just plants and species that will tolerate dappled shade throughout the day. And so it's good for a sort of woodland edge type of situation, or a situation where you have a canopy and some shade during the day. So we're working on that, testing this year. And if that goes well, which I expect it will, we'll put that into production next year. And then we're inspired by, our colleagues in the UK have mixes for stormwater management, a suds mix, which is high on our list, and we'll be testing that as well. And essentially that's just species that really are okay with periodic inundation, right, of water. And we know that we have those. I mean, there's so many meadow species here actually that already do such a good job in those conditions. So I have no doubt that that's, going to be an exciting mix as well. Yes, I think absolutely this is a great, we are, as you said so well, we're so behind other countries, and specifically, on our sort of love of wildflowers and the places they can go. And one of the best parts about driving around England is you see wildflowers on verges next to the road, and you see them in drainage ditches and in places where they're not only looking beautiful, but they're also doing a job, right? Which is taking that water and
Yes.
drawing it deeper into the earth so that it's not standing there, it's not causing problems.
And
So
we can
it's
replenish
great.
our drinking supplies.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is
That too.
something that it's interesting since I've moved back to the States, just talking to people about the freshwater aquifers in lots of wet areas like Louisiana, that, it's depleting at a record rate where it's a wet climate. So we really need, the earth to absorb the rainwater and do the work for us of providing
That's right.
drinking water. Very
That's
important.
right. That's right. Absolutely. And plants can be such a big part of that. And I think, all of us who are in this industry thinking about it every day, like, we know that, right? And I know that's so much a part of many people's inspiration in this industry. So it's exciting to think about how we can do that. And, hopefully there's some pushes like the legislation that's happened in England to kind of drive that forward over the years here in the US.
Good point. About one of my questions was the challenges of adoption. Do you think, enough people are ready to adopt the look of wildflowers, professionals and homeowners and, parks and communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the answer is there's a groundswell. It feels to me like I'm really curious to hear your thoughts of somebody who's been in the industry longer than me. But from all accounts, as I talk to people, and I really asked this question a lot when I was thinking about this business and the, business plan. But it feels to me like there is a groundswell of demand for wildflowers from homeowners. Maybe a lot of education that has to go along with that. And there's also appreciation from people in the trade. What I'll say about homeowners is I think it's important that we help educate people as to what does a natural landscape look like throughout the seasons, right? And so we all have, we've talked about this vision we have of this brightly colored, first of all, that may not be what a native meadow looks like here. And so you kind of get over that threshold maybe a little bit. And then you get into, okay, well, what does it look like when it's not looking its best, right? And there's the moment in the spring where it's emerging and it's kind of a little patchy looking. And then there's the when the flowers kind of die back, I think a lot of us are appreciative of these seed heads and how beautiful they look in frost and that sort of thing. But it's a bit of an acquired taste for a lot of people. And so I think just meeting clients in the middle where they are and helping them appreciate what the sort of evolution of landscapes, whether they're meadows or plantings, I think is a really important part of the job. From the contractor, and sort of professional side of it, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword because, again, if you have a product like a meadow that's really hard to put in and has so much risk associated with failure, you don't want it. It's very hard for a small landscaping firm to take on a meadow and know that they might be on the hook for the homeowner not liking the way it looked, or it not working because of weeds or not germinating the right way. And that's really hard. And so I think, again, that was sort of the mission with which I founded this company, is how do we make it easier for landscapers? But I think helping educate people about the cost sort of benefit trade-off, because there are real clear cost savings with meadows, but there is still the maintenance that I talked about. So there's a lot of education, I think, on both sides. Curious what you think.
Well, and we spoke before the recording started about a project that I I had met with many clients that were interested in meadows, but it was still to get them to, you know, sign on the dotted line, understand, and we hadn't installed one either. So again, being upfront with that, we've not done this before. This is what, the provider tells us about. We'll have to weed every, the weeds will come because you're disturbing the ground. And it was, a couple acres of land that we convinced a homeowner to do. But really, after the first year, into the start of the second year, he was really wanting to give up. And I think I didn't expect that. You think once
Yeah.
you sell them on the idea, there's a lot of work. We have to come back regularly. We have to do this. I think that was the harder one whenever the client was like, I'm just going to lay turf, regular turf. And I'm like, no, we've worked so hard. And, to give up at that point, I guess that was one thing I didn't expect. Once you sell them on the idea, you do the install, they see it, you're still weeding, you're working on it, working pretty hard on making it right, and halfway through the process, giving up. So I think that was unexpected. And really, we fought, we educated, we got the company that provided the seed in on the discussions, but we do have, I think from a design and install company point of view, you want that instant gratification, and it's hard to have with a meadow, which I think that the meadow turf, gets it over that hard initial, challenge, but it's still an evolving landscape. I do think even with native plants, it's the same challenge. You talked about knowing what the seedlings look like. I think that that's a challenge because seedlings look completely different than the mature plant.
Right. Yeah.
So, we've interviewed companies doing projects. There's one that comes to mind in Arkansas where the landscape architects had little pictures of the seedlings that were on the stakes, so we planted this here and this is what the seedling looks like and this is what the mature plant looks like. So they weren't plucked out thinking they were weeds because again, it's a different ball game with
Absolutely.
native plants, with meadow plant, and seedlings are different. We're not used to seeing those as professionals, we're used to
No.
the plants.
No, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think that even happens, I was just I just saw on Instagram somebody I follow was posting about how, somebody good naturedly kind of came through the gardens she managed as a gardener and sort of weeded out all the self-sowing, perennials. And so I think that I think that this is a space where we really need to educate. And the more that we can, companies like mine, who's, our job is to help the landscape professional, like that is our audience. We love homeowners and we hope they have meadows, but our job is really to cater to the needs of the person putting in the meadow. Right. And I think, we are developing seedling ID guides too, because if you're going to take care of this, you need to know, what the beneficial seedlings look like and then what the noxious weeds look like. Right.
And get them sooner and leave the good ones alone. But
that's right.
Well, and I guess the same thing like a native planting scheme, they will self-seed, they will move where they're happy. That's a good thing.
That's a
You
great thing.
want the
Right.
plants to thrive in, a wetter area, and they move to that area to help soak in the water. But then the ones that need to dry out move to another area.
Yeah. And I think that's a difference between the kind of landscape mentality we have here in the US versus the UK, because I think going back, in landscape design history, to put on my dorky, school hat again, but it really felt like there was a love of wildness early in England. Right. And I think that hasn't translated fully here. So the idea that a garden might evolve or that a garden might be full and packed full of life versus sort of isolated plantings as specimens, I feel like like that's still a journey we're on in the US. But it looks like, it feels to me again like there's a swell of interest and aesthetic preference for this sort of look that's a little bit more naturalistic. So, hoping that that continues, of course.
Well, and I think game changers like Pete Udolph doing the High Line in New York. We were recently there and it was packed with people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the first time I went there, it was a different time of year, but I had it almost to myself when I visited the High Line. And now, but again, it was in the summer and it was fantastic to see so many people appreciating a naturalistic design and style.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of projects, and we have a lot of audience members. In fact, after this, I'll have to send you some copies of our publication so you can see some of the projects that we've featured that are naturalistic. There is much more of a movement to embrace that naturalistic planting style. I think Meadowlab is launching at a great time. And what we hope is that everyone who's listening and can make an impact by supporting Meadowlab and getting those projects in the ground, showing others how it can be done successfully and beautifully, that again, that will allow you to develop the more specialty mixes, the regional mixes, and expand in other areas around the country. So, those of you in the Northeast, get in contact with Claire. And do you want to tell everybody how they can reach you, how they can place orders or get more information on Meadowlab's
Yeah.
products?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And yes, we're so excited to work with people. So our website is meadowlab.com and we have a, inquire section, get a quote section on the website so people can input details there and we'll, reach out and respond and discuss specific projects or people can also email sales@meadowlab.com and a member of our very small but very motivated team will get back to you. So yeah, really excited to get stuff in the ground and support people's beautiful projects.
And I think you even do some training for
Yeah,
those
that's right.
partners as well.
That's right. Yeah, we're in the fall, we'll pick up again. We ran a training this spring in March, and it's for landscape professionals who are looking for a sort of deeper grasp of meadows. And so we have a full day training program, and we go through everything: seeding, sod, of course, and our wildflower soil. And it's a great day, and we'll be bringing that back in the fall once we get through our first harvest.
That is awesome. Well, we're very excited to have more information about Meadowlab out to our audience. And it's been great to meet you, Claire. And I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat with you.
Thanks, Claire.